Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And today, we're going to start talking about Toll the Hounds, Volume 8 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I started it today, and we're going to talk about the prologue and chapters 1 to 3. Now, this is going to be interesting. We'll see where this goes, and yeah, let's just get started. Cheers. All right. So, after the grand finale of Reaper's Gale, we are back in Daruzistan, or at least on Genebakis in general. And with Toll the Hounds, there's a few interesting things to talk about here that, yeah, how to say, the story, I feel Toll the Hounds is different in style and in a lot of other things. It's very different than other novels of like parts of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I need to be careful here. I can't say novels of the Malazan because then we're talking about the Esselman novels, which we'll talk about at some point. I'm 100% sure. But yeah, this is the eighth novel, and it is something of a framed narrative. And there's a bunch of frames going on here, like I guess the big one here is that we have this story told to us by everyone's favorite magnanimous character of the story, Magnanimous Krupp. He's telling this story in his dream world to everyone's favorite elder god, Krul, and someone who is a bard. Now, which bard is he? We don't know yet. I mean, I know, but it's not officially mentioned. I guess people can guess, though. I guess people can guess. That's dumb. Yes, but I feel that alone from looking at most of the chapter headings, the chapter quotes at the beginning of chapters, if you look at those, I feel you can already guess who the guy is, because that's sort of where I feel the second framing comes in, but we'll talk about that in a later situation. Anyway, Krupp is telling us a story about his city, the Ruzhistan. We've spoken about Krupp's connection to the Ruzhistan enough times to realize that it is a very special, very personal connection there. So yeah, there is that. And we see that because at the beginning and the ending of chapters, we usually like fade out into his narration, and then we get into like the regular like way with like viewpoint characters switching and stuff like that. But the endings of the chapters is always sort of the zooming out and having the voiceover of Krupp telling that story. And that's an interesting technique to use in general, because while it may be easy to forget that, but that still means that everything that is told to us in this book is through the eyes of Krupp. So even if it's maybe not his how to say, his like direct voice talking to us, like at the end of these chapters where we go into full Krupp prose with all the embellishments, the Baroque ways of phrasing things, and so forth. The other parts are also still through Krupp's point of view, which is interesting when you look at how, for example, Krupp is described. He doesn't come like. I feel it's super interesting in that first scene with Scorch and Lev when they're playing dice with him, and he's obviously winning because it's Krupp. He always wins at dice because he's probably cheating. But he doesn't come across as annoying as he did in the Memories of Ice scene, where he's playing dice with Quick Ben, some of the bridge burners, and that's his precisely because this time around it's Krupp telling us this story, even though it's in the voice of Steven Erikson in this case. So yeah, there is that. Apart from that, like the biggest aspects of the first three chapters, I would say, is reacquaintance. Right? We meet a lot of characters that we've met before during mostly Gardens of the Moon, and obviously some others. But a lot of like Daruzhistan, returning to Daruzhistan is mostly about Gardens of the Moon, reacquainting ourselves with all these people and all the stuff there and seeing how they have fared in the meantime. So there's a lot of setting stages. We have the scene of like we kind of figure out what became of all these people, and it kind of shows us how much time has passed since Gardens of the Moon. Because it's like I'm not good with these time things because I obviously don't keep track of these things, but it's a bunch of years, right? We know that Crocus Cutter has grown older, but it's even more you know, obvious in that scene with Chalice Vidicus, like former Chalice Dahl. We remember her from their interactions with Crocus at the beginning. These very innocent interactions with Crocus at the beginnings of Gardens of the Moon. Now she's married and very much jaded at this point. And this is, I feel, something of a general like trend here. We see a lot of things. A lot of people have grown older, and aging is not always fun, right? Aging is coming to terms with a lot of disillusionment in a lot of cases, and it feels like that. We have like everyone there has grown older. We have the scene with Murillo, and when we might want to talk about that in a minute, but everyone has grown older. Everyone has grown a bit more tired, jaded, and so forth. And is that also something that goes for Daruzhistan in general? Probably not. For Krupp, probably also not, because he's Krupp. Another thing is that since the frame narrative that we have here, beginning when he sits down in his dream world at the fire that we also remember from Gardens of the Moon, and he starts talking. He's talking about sorrow. So we already know this is. I mean, this is not going to end well. We already know that. On the other hand, it's a book written by Steven Erikson. We're on volume 8 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I guess we have kind of grown used to the fact that happy endings is not what we can expect in these volumes. So there's that. But I feel it's important, especially with this volume. I feel it's important to look at all the small, tiny details of foreshadowing that are happening here to understand where things are going. Anyway, so we go all through the different characters that we've known from different places. We see that Karul's bar is still going on. They have a bard sitting there reciting parts of the Anumandaris that no one else knows. We have our bridge burners. We have Picker, Blend, Ansi, Blue Pearl, who we know exists, but that's basically it so far. He wasn't like a big character in Memories of Ice, but he's there. Mallet is still there. Diker, however you pronounce him, he's there. Yeah, that's about the crowd there. They run Karul's bar, and we check in with them, and they're apparently under threat, and we don't know by whom yet. Well, I guess we know at the end of chapter 3 we know, but we don't know exactly why and all of these things. But so we check in with those. We have this quick check-in with Chalice Dahl, now Vidicus, and her husband and his two friends, who are all like the next generation of these people that we remember, like from Gardens of the Moon. Like we had Turban Ore back there, and now we have his son. Apparently, we had Councilman Lim. He's like the first guy that Ralik Nom shoots in that in the garden there in Lady Simtal's. I mean, actually Cole's estate. We have, yeah, we have all these people that we have like the next generation. Now we see how what became of them basically. So we have that one city. And this is the other thing. We also have a second city to talk about. And I was almost going to say this is like a tale of two cities, because yes, we have Daruzhistan, and on the other hand, we have Black Coral. We'll need to talk about that in the future some more. What else do we have here? Yes, we have the bridge burners at Carol's bar. We have the old Phoenix, the old Phoenix Inn crowd. I mean, Cole is apparently now councilman again, which is cool. We have Murillo. We have Krupp. Ralik Nom finally awakes, or is awakened by everyone's favorite Jakut tyrant. And yeah, like every time Race shows up, since he's undead raced in that Azath house, he's my boy. I like him. He's cool. And the whole like his sense of humor when he wakes up Ralik Nam and sends him out into the world, that's really cool. So apparently Ralik Nam's back. Torvald Nam's back. We need to talk about Torvald Nam. I guess we'll have a long talk about him tomorrow when we talk about the next chapter. Yeah, we'll have a long talk about Torvald Nam then. But Torvald Nam's back, and we don't know what happened to him since we left him at the end of like the first book of House of Chains. He was with like the Nam family, like part of the Nam family in the Seven Cities, and everything seemed to be fine. What happened between then and now is obviously up for debate, but when he shows up, he's once again very much down on his luck. And this is an aspect of Torvald Nam's story that I feel we need to talk about some more tomorrow. Yeah, so we have those people we at the end of like chapter 3. We also see the ship with Napo, Lady Spite, Barathol, Chower, Silara, and Crocus, Cutter, and obviously also Iskarel Pust and his wife Mogora, and the mule, which has changed sex here for whatever reason, arriving in the city. Now we know that that's going to be interesting. Obviously, Cutter wants to come back. There was just to recall, like during the Bone Hunters, they had that contact with the Herald of Hood, who is a Segula. And that Segula was talking about the return of the tyrants, and we know that Cutter. That's why Cutter fears the return of the tyrant. Wants to warn his people, and we'll see how that whole thing goes. But so they have also arrived in the city. As I said, like these first 3 chapters are very much about setting the stage, putting the people back, putting all the players on the board, seeing who is there. Like I guess it'll also continue with like the next chapter. Still, like once again, it's like the beginning of like a new book. So that's usually how that goes. We check in with everybody, make clear who's gonna be our dramatis personae, and look at where they're at. But once again, like I feel what this book does already is give us in like the very first chapters this sense of a looming threat that will happen in the future. Like everyone is holding their breath, and also there is this whole atmosphere of tiredness. Like everyone is tired and growing older, and there is this threat, and the big question is like, are people still up to dealing with that, or is everyone too old? And we see that definitely in that scene with Murillo, who is no longer the young dandy that he was. Which kind of leads me to question how many years have actually passed between Gardens of the Moon and this. It's like, I have no idea. Because is it like, I don't know, 5, 6 years maybe? I don't know. But yeah, he is no longer the that guy, but in an effort and a drunken, problematic effort, he's in his midlife crisis basically. He decides to actually seduce or be seduced by the daughter of the person that he was actually trying to seduce in a way, which has fatal consequences for him. Like, I'm not gonna read too much into that. It Yeah, I don't know. It just the whole way it is portrayed, the whole like the amount of self pity that someone like Murillo has in him. I mean, we already saw signs of that during Memories of Ice, right? When he had these conversations with Cole about him about growing older and not being the young, dashing duelist that he was, and the idea of like trying to recapture past glories is something that is a theme that will come up again and again in this book. Which brings us to Black Coral, the other city. Black Coral is obviously Coral, but now in permanent night because of our good friends, the Tist Andy. And yeah, um, there's humans and Tist Andy living there, and Anamander Rake is not doing much. We meet new characters, Spinok Durav. We meet Endest Silan, a broken mage, and we just see that city is in darkness, and not everyone is happy with that. We also learn that there is the burial of the Redeemer outside that people go to and pray to. So once again, this is all about setting a stage there. Yes, very much that. And the big question that we need to ask ourselves here is how much of that, like, self-doubt and yeah, how much of that is actually justified and how much of that is self-inflicted self-pity in a way, because it's very clear with Enda Silan that he has lost a lot of power, like his magic power when doing the whole Moonspawn thing from Memories of Ice. But we still need to figure out, and he's very much suffering from that. We see how the city in general, he's now just a castellan. But the problem is, and this is something that I kind of feel partial to, is like once you let a specific personal issue, a handicap, so to speak, once you let that thing define yourself too much, you can fall into this trap where you see everything around you, like every kindness that people show to you, you see all of that as pity, and you see everything through that lens, and that will just drag you deeper down and further down into that hole. And I wish I knew how to get out of that. I don't. I struggle with it from time to time. But we see it with Enda Silan, we see it very much in that area. We also see the group of the Tist Ande from, like, led by Clip. We see them arriving on the same continent, hopefully probably on the same continent. They might just still be in a war, I don't know. And they are obviously headed for a confrontation with Anomander Rake. So we see there's one of our like coming confrontations, or is there? Like that's like the thing with these books. At this point, I feel we can be confident to say that we're definitely heading towards a convergence, and we can like start to figure out where that convergence will happen, what that convergence will be like, what it will look like, it will look like. And yeah, we see that group of led by Nemander Gullet, or led by Clip, but with Nemander being our main character there. We I guess we need at some point we need to talk about the idea of Anomander Rake denying worship, because that's sort of the problem with Clip, because he feels like, as mortal sword of Anomander Rake, who does not want to be a god or denies being a god, how does that whole thing work? But he's trying to force that. He's trying to force that issue in the future. We already know that he's trying to do that. It's like, can people force someone to be their god? Is that possible in a way? So we see that aspect growing there over time. But yeah, still, we also learn like more about that group of Tistandi and who they are, but not too much yet. We just see that, like, at least from the perspective of Nimander Golith, that everyone in that group is flawed or broken in some way by the events of the past. Another thing that we should look at is the idea of like, once again, how Stephen Erickson frames things and how he introduces elements that will become important later. One of those is the idea of the drink Kellic, which is mentioned both in passing with Gruntle, when Gruntle comes back on the scene in chapter 3, and he has like a caravan of that stuff from Bastion. We know the city of Bastion was very much a domain in the was very much in the in the empire of the Panion Seers. It was part of the Panion domain, and whatever it is, we don't know, but it's also drunk in Black Coral. Another question: there's like Seer domain, that one Seer domain. It's not like explicitly said yet, but I feel we can confidently say that this is the Seer domain who was helping Tok the Younger during during Memories of Ice, just from like the hints there. I'm not even sure if it's ever mentioned explicitly, but from where I'm standing, especially when he has like this memory about the cat man coming back and everything, he's the guy, and he is now playing tile chess or whatever it's called, Kaftanar. He's playing that with Spinnock, but it's not actually with Spinnock, but it's with Anomander Rake through Spinnock playing. I don't know. As I said, these first chapters are very much about establishing mood, about establishing atmosphere, establishing like recalling characters, doing all these things. So there's not that much of like really deep things yet for me to talk about, I feel. But it's nice to check in with everybody. But there's this the whole book, at least the opening chapters, feel very much like this is all. Everyone is feeling older, more tired. It's all, yeah. The effort of just keeping going, the effort of keeping on are felt by people, and I guess we'll have to see how that continues in the next couple of chapters. I mean, yeah. There's an introduction of a new one, which is Humble Measure, which is a funny name. Who seems to be the one who is behind the attacks on the Malazan veterans in Darushistan for yet unknown reasons. He's also doing other things which we don't know yet, but as I said, this is just like setting the stage, so to speak. And I feel setting the stage is an even more appropriate term right now, because we're in Krupp's story and he's basically telling us all these things. So we'll see that. One other thing that I feel is important to look at is from the prologue. When we had this meeting of a number of gods in this weird place, which was like Shadowed Throne, obviously Edgewalker, who is someone we should probably have a talk about at some point, and someone hooded. who might be Hood, or maybe not. Who knows? Um, Also, obviously, the scene within Dragnipur, where we see that something's happening with Dragnipur because there's no more people coming into the sword because Anomander Rake has stopped using the sword for a while now. And we already know that that's a problem because that whole like wagon, that whole cart within Dragnipur needs to be moved because it's obviously the gate to the Hold of Darkness, and also it's pursued by chaos. So there's your other conflict going on there. Well, another thing that I really enjoyed, this is maybe just me, is that episode where Baruch is sitting there and reading the book that Anomander Rake sent him. And just the way it is written is so fun because yes, the way that piece of history or historiography that Baruch is reading with all these repetitive phrases and like the thousand god with blood on his on their face and these. Yes, that's what you see in, I don't know, recently when I spoke about Gilgamesh. You have all these returning things because that's what happens when you write down something from an oral tradition, because these are things to help with your memory when reciting these things as in an oral tradition. But it can also be used as an art form, which is what's happening here. And it's once again one of these things where it's like, this reads very much like your typical, not your typical, like your kind of ancient, like old historiography that goes that way. But we know that we have this happening in our own world, you know. I don't know how to explain. I just found it very funny that that Baruch is realizing that this is made on purpose to pretend or like put on airs of greater antiquity, which that specific source doesn't have, and he realizes that. And we can take something away from that, I guess, to our own readings of historiography and of historical sources, because yeah. Just because something reads ancient doesn't mean it's old. It could also just be a pretense, in a way, to pretend to be older than it is. And that's something that we should all keep in mind, I guess. So yeah, I feel like summing up what I try to ramble about today is, it's very much about setting the stage. It's very much to keep in mind that this is a story told by Krupp through Krupp's eyes, and we have to read anything that we find here through that lens and be aware that this is told like second or third hand, basically. In a way, the next thing is to realize that there is this overall idea of everything being a bit stretched too thin, being exhausted, being worn thin, slightly jaded compared to the fresh energy, the vibrancy that we had in the beginning of Gardens of the Moon. And I feel this is interesting because the other thing that happens is that once again we are talking about the Gederon fate. And you remember that the Gederon fate was sort of the end or high point of Gardens of the Moon, with Lady Simtal's party where everything like goes down, being like the high point of the Gederon fate. And so Gardens of the Moon ends with the Gederon fate, but this starts with the Gederon fate. And this is interesting because, as we know, that the Gederon fate is marks the beginning of the year. It's like you drive out the wolf of winter and all of that, which runs counter to that idea of like with Gardens of the Moon, it ends with that. So after that, you have all the possibilities of a new year, which then obviously is what happens with Dead House Gates and Memories of Ice. But this time around, we start the story with the beginning of a new year, So we're gonna find out what actually happens, which means a distinct lack of possibility, right? We ended it in Gardens of the Moon with like, now there is the new year and all these wide open doors of possibility going on. This time around, we start with that, and we'll see how that year turns out in Darujistan. So yeah, let's see how all of that goes. And I'll talk tomorrow about more of that. And until then, have a great Monday night. Until then, cheers.